I have this rule about not watching video essays on content I want to eventually cover because I don't want to unintentionally rip off somebody's ideas or talking points, but I watched several on Succession because I really enjoyed the show and never planned on making any content around it. That is, until I noticed that of all the video essays I was watching, of all the characters explored, there was barely any mention of Jess, and to be fair, she's barely a supporting background character without many lines, so you would think that she wouldn't need much in the way of an arc, but I disagree. Kendall's longtime assistant Jess deserves so much better not only from her employer, but arguably Succession as a show, especially in the final episodes. She's one of the only people of color who's consistently around the Roys, aside from Sanaa Lathan, good heavens, mostly confined to a tertiary role behind Kendall doing his bidding. She's used more as a tool or an instrument than anything else. We don't get to see her thoughts or opinions on some of the things the Roys do and the decisions they make, even when she's present for them. For the most part, all we can do is make inferences based on the facial expressions and body language of actress Juliana Canfield. One out of the 2 times in the entire show that Jess is actually allowed to be a character is when Kendall and Roman decide to tank the Gojo deal by effectively giving the US presidency to a turbo-fascist who, to no one's surprise, isn't exactly a fan of big foreign tech buying up an American legacy media conglomerate. That command to call the election gets passed down to Tom, who passes it down to Greg, where he runs into Jess, and she's able to, albeit tentatively, express how anxious and fearful she is of this call being made. She's stuck between her loyalty to Kendall and her own well-being because as a woman of color, she understands the implications and consequences of a Matt Walsh-adjacent president more than these ultra-wealthy, right-of-center white men who won't be negatively affected. In an interview with Vulture, Canfield states, until that moment, she's able to suspend belief about what it is she's participating in. Then these new realities come crashing into one another, and the business interests of the person she works for are in line with the political interest of someone evil. I think she's definitely contributed some bad to the world just by virtue of working within close proximity to Waystar and has been able to compartmentalize that under the guise of just doing her job, in a similar vein to how Greg tries to shake any responsibility by considering himself to be just the messenger. But this is too big and too much for her conscience to deal with, so despite working for Kendall through thick and thin, she decides it's time to call it quits. She politely asks Kendall for some time later to have a conversation, hesitant to say what it's about given that it's the day of his father's funeral, but he brashly forces the issue until she has no choice but to tell him of her resignation. When he probes into the reason why, Jess defers to her career ambitions, but it's obvious to the audience and maybe even to Kendall that she's leaving in the wake of the Roys potentially destroying the country to serve their own interest. You'd think that as a father of a young woman of color, Kendall would have more empathy for the situation, but can't see beyond his own selfishness and privilege. There was an opportunity to have Jess be the voice of reason in a sea of characters who all have their heads up their own asses, but aside from a few fleeting moments, she isn't given much of a voice at all. Despite her attempts to be considerate, Kendall intensely berates Jess like a bitter ex, stating that he gave her everything and that she couldn't possibly do better without him. All the while, Jess never stands up for herself and remains passive throughout this entire ordeal. In the very last scene we see her in, she's not inclined to completely abandon her principles for the sake of access or money, in a way making her the ideological opposite to Greg, who's proven on multiple occasions that he's willing to forsake his ideals in exchange for maintaining his status. We never get a resolution for this, and that's bothered me since the finale aired. It would have been nice to at least see Jess getting an interview with Pierce or something, but maybe it speaks to the themes of Succession that we don't really get finality or closure for most of the characters, and that there's still more story to be told beyond the horizon of the end credits. But it's up to the audience to craft that narrative. Jess definitely deserved to have more of an active role. It's one of my only real criticisms of Succession. Other than that, fantastic show. Go watch it.